welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. Stay tuned. Later in the program, we'll have confirmation on the cadre course on the political economy of the American system. But first, let's look at the French political situation now. This, as we're recording in the afternoon of Friday, the 9th of January, we've just had the liquidation of all of the patsies, all of the suspects in this case. Patsies all liquidated. I would like to point out that I had broadcast on Twitter at about 7 o'clock this morning, several hours before it occurred. France, the Charlie Hebdo suspects have been reported cornered, but the MO, the modus operandi of the police, is to liquidate the suspects to avoid embarrassing interrogations, as in the case of Mohamed Merah in 2012, in the springtime of 2012, almost 3 years ago. And sure enough, all patsies have now been liquidated, and we'll get into why liquidated. But let's get into the why of this entire question and look for it in a somewhat unusual but fairly obvious area. This is not terrorism about freedom of expression or anything of the sort. This is not the revenge of the Muslim fanatics. This is geopolitical terrorism. It's cleverly disguised, has duped a whole lot of people, but it is geopolitical terrorism. And what I mean by that is, you'll remember there were, 35 attempts to kill General de Gaulle of France because he insisted on the independence and the dignity and the war avoidance policies of France. He did not want to become the battlefield of a limited nuclear war. He made sure that there would be no limited nuclear war and saved France in the process. He was therefore targeted by, in effect, the NATO establishment with dozens and dozens of assassination attempts. And something similar can be said of the Aldo Moro case in Italy in 1978. He was somebody who wanted to bring the Italian Communist Party into the government, and that led to would have led to the overcoming of the blocs, the Yalta division of Europe, and that would have ended the Cold War about 10 or 12 years earlier than it actually happened. Geopolitical terrorism designed to enforce, first of all, the division of Europe into the two rival military blocs, Warsaw Pact and NATO, and since about 25 years ago, it's a one-way street. It's only to assert U.S., British, NATO, CIA control, Wall Street control, City of London control over continental Europe in most cases. Now, let's look at the immediate prelude to the Charlie Hebdo, and that is the interview, the New Year's interview. This is a very important, major statement by President François Hollande on the Monday of this week. That is to say, on Monday the 5th of January, 48 hours before the Patsy killers broke in to the office of Charlie Hebdo, we have this interview. And this is a very important interview, which has, of course, gotten lost in the hysteria now. So what does he say? It's a 2-hour interview. It's basically saying, this is my agenda. It's kind of like a State of the Union address by François Hollande. And we'll talk about his personal predicament in just a minute. An unprecedented 2-hour interview for his economic policies, but also for foreign policy issues. And here's what he said. Hollande is talking. He says, Russian President Putin does not want to annex eastern Ukraine. He has assured me of that. And he went on to say that the Western sanctions against Russia, allegedly based on the situation in Crimea and Donetsk and Lugansk, those sanctions should be lifted if progress is attained in resolving the Ukrainian crisis. Quote from the president of France, "I think the sanctions must stop now." Let me repeat that for you. The president of France categorically states the sanctions must stop now. The noise you hear in the background is the collapse of the U.S. British sanctions regime against Russia. I think the sanctions must stop now. They must be lifted if there is any progress. If there is no progress, the sanctions will remain. But he thinks that progress can be attained. It's within reach. And he goes on to say, quote, "Mr. Putin does not want to annex Eastern Ukraine. Monsieur Putin does not want to annex Eastern Ukraine. He has told me that. What he wants is to remain influential. What he wants is for Ukraine not to fall into the NATO camp." And Hollande struck an optimistic note ahead of a conference, not much talked about here, on January 15th, that is to say in next week, middle of next week, specifically the 15th is next Thursday, there will be this conference in Kazakhstan, in Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan. And there, Hollande wants to attend that meeting. The basis of the meeting is President Putin of Russia, President Poroshenko of Ukraine. That's the one we call Pornoshenko on this broadcast. So Putin and Pornoshenko will be there, but the leaders of France and Germany are also expected to attend the meeting. That means Merkel and Hollande. And Hollande says, "I will go to Astana on January 15th on one condition, which is that there should be a possibility of making new progress. If it's just to meet and talk without making any actual advances, then there's no point to that. But I think there will be progress." And never too far from his considerations, the article on this on France 24, France 24, they say they head to this, and that those sanctions include two large amphibious assault ships, two Mistral-class warships, which the French are building, and which should have been delivered to Russia already. This is a 1.2 billion euro deal. This has been delayed. The delivery has been delayed until further notice, and France could lose thousands of jobs, international credibility, and face even a fine under international agreements. And, of course, everybody knows that France does not have any interest in these reckless, irresponsible, incompetent, crackpot sanctions in favor of the Kiev fascist clique, we may add. And it's only done because of the strong-arm pressure of Kerry and these other people. Right? By the way, Kerry, you got to hear Kerry speak French this week, and it's nothing to write home about. If you have a chateau in Brittany, you better speak French better than this vacuous, blasé, ruling class, skull and bones character, Kerry. Now, a couple of other things in this interview that are designed to freak out London and Washington. Hollande says France will not intervene militarily in Libya and is on the whole rather relaxed about Greece. He says, Greece, yeah, they're free to choose. These are unacceptable positions. Could there be a link between this interview and the events? Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Griffin here in Washington, D.C. It's the 9th of January. Now, we're going to get back to Hollande's landmark interview to France Inter, right? France Inter, which is the principal radio. It's the largest of all the various French radio stations, where where he says the sanctions against Russia must end. It spells the collapse of the entire sanctions regime. And we'll talk about the implications for that conference in Astana, Kazakhstan. But first of all, I'm very pleased to be able to announce that we will indeed be holding the first of what I hope will become a series of seminars. This is a seminar in philosophy and economics and organizing, and generally questions that pertain to world historical political activity in the months and years ahead. And this is going to be held on the weekend of January 23rd, 24th, and 25th. And that's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Friday the 23rd, Saturday the 24th, and Sunday the 25th of January. The location of this is in Silver Spring, Maryland. Silver Spring, Maryland. It's well within the range of the Washington, D.C. subway system, the Metro. Silver Spring, Maryland, and it's on the January 23rd, 24th, and 25th. I know I've received a goodly number of inquiries about this, expressions of interest, and that was a great help. I thank everybody who communicated with me about this. I haven't been able to answer all of them, but that was a very important encouragement, right, to keep going and to be able to find a place to hold this. Now, I'm not going to announce any of the details here because it gets to be too long, but I would just do two things. If you want to take part, we want very much for you to register in advance. So here's the way you register. You send an email to taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com. Tax Wall Street Party. TAXWALLSTREETPARTY @gmail.com. taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com. Include your name and your phone number, and we will get back to you with the full particulars about registration. And I'm just going to leave it at that, except the other thing to say is try to read in advance for this course. You're going to get a whole lot more out of it if you prepare yourself. The most fundamental, the most basic, obvious thing is get a hold of my book, Surviving the Cataclysm, Your Guide to the Worst Financial Crisis in Human History. Get the 2009 edition, which was brought up to date to include the main outlines of the world derivatives and banking panic of 2008. So it includes the Lehman Brothers crisis and the, $27 trillion Federal Reserve line of credit for zombie banks, hedge fund hyenas, and others. So again, Silver Spring, Maryland, 23rd, 24th, 25th of January, 2 weeks from now. Register by sending an email to taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com. Include your name, include your phone number. We'll get back to you, and we'll be off to the races. In the meantime, read Surviving the Cataclysm, and if you can also read maybe with that, after that, parallel to that, I would get a hold of Plato's Republic and read, I guess it's book 7. I'm sorry, I don't have the reference in front of me, but the chapter of Plato's Republic that expounds on oligarchy, tyranny, democracy, timocracy, and other forms of rule. But in particular, the Surviving the Cataclysm. And I hope to see a number of people there. And there'll be more technical details about this next week. But please do now send your email request. taxwallstreetparty@gmail.com. Include your name and your phone number, and you will hear from us very soon. And I'm sorry to say, even those who have sent me emails, you better send another email to this address now, because we've had to reorganize the way this works technically, administratively, and so forth. Okay, so here's the story now. Hollande. 48 hours before the shooting starts at Charlie Hebdo, Hollande essentially announces that he is going to wreck the sanctions structure of NATO against Russia. He goes on to say he will not invade Libya on his own. There had been pressure for that. Obviously, people in London, Washington, would like to see France bogged down in a new Algerian war, in this case in Libya, or a new Indochina war. A new Dien Bien Phu was being created for France by the Anglo-American geopolitical boutique. Hollande is not buying that. Rather, you notice Hollande is intervening in Africa where he thinks it helps, where he thinks there's uranium in places like Mali or the the Ivory Coast and other such places. And we've been critical of those. And then there's this question of the Astana conference. Imagine, one thing is if you have Merkel as a hopeless case of imbecility and submission and absolute subordination. If you had Merkel and France and Ukraine lining up against Putin, then Putin is isolated. But if it's France and Putin against Germany and porno, well, that's a whole different story, isn't it? And it means that the ability of this awful Merkel to do the bidding of the State Department will be significantly reduced. And you can bet that if those Mistral-class warships are released to Russia, will be pure hysteria coming out of the State Department, pure hysteria coming from that Kiev fascist clique. Okay, so we've got all these questions. France is setting up a military base in northern Niger, 100 Ks from the Libyan border, south of it. France is operating drones out of Niger, but this is all uranium-oriented. It's not oil-oriented in the name of what London and Washington might want. And then we get down to Greece, right? On the 25th, we're going to have the Greek elections. We hope to have a report about that from Athens here in this program. But the question is, Colonel has been putting stuff. Hollande says, no, they're free to choose their own destiny. Give me more about that in just a second. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. More on the landmark interview of François Hollande, President of France. 2 days, 48 hours before the shooting started at Charlie Hebdo, he announced the end of the sanctions against Russia for all practical purposes. If France exits the sanctions, then the sanctions essentially cease to have any meaning at all. We'll talk about why he might be doing this. And then the question of Syriza. Parenthesis now is that Merkel, in her consummate stupidity, has based her entire rhetorical posture on this idea, well, if you Greeks, right, if you lazy bums down there, if you vote for Syriza, I'm going to kick you out of Europe. Well, easier said than done. She wants to kick Greece out of Europe. She's covering her right flank from the xenophobic racists of Alternatives for Germany, right? They ran their whole European campaign, kick out the Greeks. So that's Merkel. And Samaras, the reactionary austerity ghoul, NATO, IMF, EU Commission, Troika enforcer in Athens. Samaras is the same thing. If you vote for Syriza, you're leaping into the abyss. Greece will exit the euro. And as I told you last week already, no, no, and no. There is no Grexit. There might be a Rauschmiss, right? There might be the throwing out of Greece. But that's not an exit. It's not an exit. It would be an expulsion. The Grexpulsion is what these reactionaries from Samaras to Merkel are talking about. So the big issue then is, would Hollande parrot the same hysterical Merkelite and Troika and Samaras rhetoric? And the answer is no. He said, Greece is free to choose their own destiny. We want them to respect their agreements, but they can decide that. Obviously, the Greek government should respect its agreements. Merkel, by contrast, had said the exit from the euro is almost inevitable if Syriza comes to power. Well, why is that? Does that mean that Europe has become sens unique, one-way street to reactionary politics? No. Merkel's position is absurd and ridiculous, and it reeks of her own submission and propitiation of the Anglo-American party power apparatus. What can we call it? All right. So here we have Hollande bucking NATO, CIA, City of London, Wall Street, you name it, Obama, Cameron, the entire crew. What is this? It's France, once again. Have the institutions designed by de Gaulle, have they achieved yet another victory over a mediocre politician such as Hollande has been? Remember, those institutions, right, when you take up your residence in the Élysée Palace, you are gripped by complexes of interests and of bureaucracy, right? The French civil service, all those people from the École Nationale de l'Administration, right? The School of Administration, one of the elite grandes écoles of France. So I think something like this has happened. He's been captured to some extent by de Gaulle's institutions. De Gaulle dead is more powerful than Hollande alive, but Hollande alive can stay alive thanks to the institutions left behind by de Gaulle. And then, of course, the fact that Hollande's popularity had collapsed. He's down to Jimmy Carter, George W. Bush levels, 20%, 15% sometimes. So he's got to do something. So it looked to me like that 2-hour interview was signaling a change of course, that something very different was going to happen. And now you see it, right? That it's enough with these sanctions. And if you destroy 2,000 to 3,000 jobs in the French shipbuilding sector, then that essentially seals your doom. And you're doing that for what? For the Anglo-Americans? And what have they done for you lately? So now we have this terror event, and I'll just jump to the chase. We'll see how much time we have to continue this. The big winner, of course, in these shootings and killings in Paris is the demagogue Marine Le Pen, the Vichysoise. Her pedigree comes straight from Marshal Pétain and the Vichy government, because her father, this old character, right, Jean-Marie Le Pen, was an official. He was a supporter of the Vichy government of old Marshal Pétain. So it's this kind of element that we're seeing. The Front National, Le Pen, really scurrilous attempt to scapegoat foreigners for the depression created by bankers, a new low, right? And we know where that method comes from, right? Who is most famous for scapegoating a minority, blaming them for the depression? We know who that was. We don't even have to say it. You know who. So this is what it is. So, and of course, she's now attempting to turn this to her advantage. There's supposed to be a unity march in Paris on Sunday, this coming. That would be the 11th. And we got all kinds of people there. Renzi of Italy is going to go there. The Spanish prime minister is going to go there. People, all kinds of heads of government, heads of state from all over Europe are going to be there. There's also going to be an interior ministers meeting, that is to say police ministers. You're going to have Eric Holder. You're going to have Cazeneuve as the host. And so forth. And they're talking about the Union Sacrée. The Union Sacrée is the all-party government, right? The national coalition that includes everybody. Well, last time you had that was 1914 to 1918, 3 million dead. I don't recommend that. But Le Pen has already made sure that this is unlikely. She wants to make it look like she was not invited, so she's been insulted, and she says that's the end of unity. You can forget the whole thing. we urge Hollande to stick to the course that he began in this France Inter interview, and that is to say, argue, impose, unilaterally, make real the collapse of the sanctions regime against Russia. This is absurd and obsolete. And go to Astana on the 15th and put this Poroshenko in his place. We need the France that can say no. This was a great tradition, that de Gaulle could say no. He could say, when NATO came to General de Gaulle with orders, the answer was very often no. Another term is l'exception française. France is exceptional. It has a special idea of itself, and it can therefore play an absolutely valuable and indeed indispensable role in the cultural and political life of the Western world. The other thing, of course, we have to note is the idiocy, the insignificance intellectually, morally of the left liberals who really don't understand anything. I would say right now we've had a couple of these intelligence community stunts or operations, I guess I'd have to say. We've had the interview. We discussed that in previous weeks, right, with the Rand Corporation and the intelligence community behind Sony, with the connections through Amy Pascal, and now we've got Charlie Hebdo. And what was Charlie Hebdo? Charlie Hebdo was a group at the beginning in the late 1950s and early 1960s, around 1960 when it was created. In the early years of the de Gaulle regime, it was a bunch of ex-Vichy sympathizers who set up a magazine called Harry Carey against General de Gaulle. So now, realness. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. I have to announce that for the second week in a row, the prison authorities at the Jackson State Prison in Michigan have refused our request, the request of this program and the GCN network, to interview Reverend Pinckney, who is now becoming one of the most prominent political prisoners here in the United States, right, held incommunicado once again this week by the prison authorities. We've been in touch with the warden's office, we believe, and the answer was it's not going to happen today, right? Because you have to go through a procedure to allow Reverend Pinckney to call out. So we're doing whatever we can to keep this in the public eye, and certainly we know next week on the 15th of January there's going to be the final sentencing event, the sentencing hearing, I guess, which the prison authorities and this local clique, right? We know the sheriff, Paul Bailey, the county commissioner, other people, right? This whirlpool operation. It's all under the aegis of Congressman Fred Upton and his corrupt Whirlpool Wall Street political machine, largest appliance manufacturer in the world. They would like to have that sentencing hearing secret, executive session, behind closed doors. Well, what is that? Where does that fit into the U.S. Legal tradition? Nowhere. This is an absolute monstrosity. So if you're going to do it in open court and do it in front of the glaring publicity of world public opinion, which is now more and more focused on Barbarian County, Michigan, and this operation with all white juries and jury pools that are packed with close cronies of the prosecutor, Mr. Sepik, and others. So we're going to try that again next week. So, but in the meantime, keep up the pressure on the Michigan prison authorities and keep this issue in front of the public on social media, especially as we build up to the 15th of January. Now, just a couple of concluding things about these French events. First of all, we can sum it up, right? It's the 15th of January in Astana, where Hollande could play an absolutely critical role. There's also going to be, we think, a Syria conference in Moscow at the end of January, where the French would obviously also play a role. There are also stories now that Foreign Minister Fabius, who has a bad record, is going to be dumped under the pretext of health reasons. So that might be another sign of a shift, that Hollande had figured out that he was going nowhere, that the Anglo-Americans had led him down the garden path, and they were going to then dump him. So that's maybe what he wanted to turn away from. General ideas about the French situation. As I said before, the left liberal mushheads, I would say at this point, there are not a few of them who would accept a general war now, deluding themselves that it would be a general war for freedom of expression and free speech. Where have we heard that before? 100 years ago we had the war to make the world safe for democracy. Now we might have a world war with far more casualties to make the world safe for free speech. And unfortunately, in both cases, we have operations that reek of intelligence operations. And I mean by that the interview, once again, with the Rand Corporation and the CIA, and now this case, which we'll get to in a minute. So it's, generally speaking, to solidify the dupery, the marché des dupes of these left liberals who are now posturing. They're so happy they can posture. And also, remember, they love to be duped. It's also anti-Assad, right? The other day in the morning, there's another interesting thing you can see on my Twitter. I put out in the morning that somehow, some way, the Anglo-Americans would try to turn this event into a reason to bomb Assad, right? People who are sympathizing with ISIS kill people in Paris, and somehow in this echo chamber, this wilderness of mirrors of the Anglo-American mind, that becomes a reason to not bomb ISIS, but to bomb Assad. And sure enough, Andrea Mitchell, Mrs. Alan Greenspan, somebody who hobnobs with the people of power, right? Mind like a rag bag. She repeats what she's heard at the dinner table or whatever it is, and she says, well, maybe one way to start dealing with terrorism is to stop ignoring the civil war in Syria after 4 years and do something about it. And we know, of course, when somebody like this says, do something about it, she means bomb Assad. So it's anti-Assad. It's anti-Putin in the sense that here's Hollande saying some things that are actually helping Putin, and he gets slammed. It's anti-Tsipras in the sense that here he is. He's on record saying, let's not, in effect, let's not get too excited about this. The Greeks can choose what they want. Undercutting the hysteria coming from Berlin, right? Is Merkel, God knows, is she still compos mentis? We don't know. She's so excited over this Tsipras case. So it's anti-Tsipras. And it's anti-Hollande, because the idea is if Hollande wants to do anything positive, the Anglo-Americans are clearly going to back Le Pen. And I have to say a few words to people who have been deluded that Le Pen is a friend of Putin. That's a deception posture. That's maskirovka. That we do not allow. Le Pen is an absolute asset of NATO and the what can we say, the U.S. Anglo-American intelligence community. That's Le Pen. Whatever she says, you'll be amazed, right? That's the way demagogues work. But she's now been strengthened, right? She's now essentially the opposition to Hollande is Sarkozy fighting for attention, but Le Pen gets all the limelight. Now, let's say a couple of things about who did this. The Kouachi brothers, right? We had two things going on today. We had the print shop at the area of Charles de Gaulle Airport, where we had the two shooters, we think, from the Charlie Hebdo affair, massacre, 12 people dead, one hostage. In this case, the two Kouachis were killed, of course, and the hostage made it out alive. Then we have the supermarket, hyper caché, super kosher supermarket at the Porte de Vincennes, and there we had this guy Koulibaly. You see him; he's the black guy in the photographs. He was killed, and 4 of the hostages, 4 dead, allegedly. Right? We don't know any of this stuff, but just to situate the official story. So that's what we have. Now, who are these people? Well, Sharif Kouachi is known for two things. In 2005, he was arrested and jailed for a year and a half because he wanted to go to Syria and then cross into Iraq to fight the U.S. invasion forces in Iraq. So he is a militant, a guerrilla, a jihadi, whatever you want. He's a violent international operative and a patsy, of course. So this Kouachi, Sharif, went across, came back. So the police knew him. They knew his life, his death, his miracles. The police knew everything about Kouachi. And then later, I guess around 2008, there was a conspiracy, a plot, to bust a certain Belkacem out of jail. Belkacem, another bomber, another jihadi. His goal had been to blow up the certain stations of the Paris metro, the subway, in 1995. So we have Sharif Kouachi questioned by the police, and now he's a repeat suspect, repeat offender, what have we. And it turns out that Koulibaly was also a part of the attempt to bust out Belkacem. So the police knew all about these guys. It's essentially a cell. The two Kouachi brothers, plus Koulibaly, plus now this woman who's supposedly still on the run, and that is to say Ayat Boumediene. You don't know anything much about her. There were a couple of others, but it's a cell. And you have a big police department. They can't keep a cell like that under surveillance. I can't believe it. Strange. Back to the